Hi, I'm the political geek that is Martin Curtis, and welcome to Change from the Centre, which is my commentary about domestic politics. It's impossible this week, I think, to talk about anything else other than the international scene. And I want to talk about the international scene as it applies to us domestically and challenge our approach a little bit domestically, because I think particularly the opposition politicians are getting it wrong. The things that are going on are really significant. The stuff in Venezuela, as an example, potential annexing of Greenland. So I want to talk about them and what our approach is. But I also want to talk a little bit towards the end about the UN, because I think that's an area where we might be able to work better and closer with America. Funnily enough, the first thing, I'm not going to do a commentary on the legal rights and wrongs of what Trump did with Venezuela. Others have done that, and you've heard it. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm genuinely not gonna comment about it. What I do want to talk about, though, is the implications, and I think you've all heard about the implications for abroad, and what it means for China as an example, and how it might give them an excuse to start making accusations against the president of Taiwan as a means of getting him out. But it's the Greenland thing in particular that interests me because of its wider implications and what it might mean for the UK. And we're not talking about it enough. The annexation of Greenland, but also the fact that America feels able to have a genuine discussion about the annexation of Greenland, is really difficult, because actually, we opposed the annexation of the Falkland Islands and defended the Falkland Islands against annexation in 1982. And what we're starting to do, or what America is starting to do, is give the Argentinians an opportunity, really, to revisit that. And Argentina is being given that opportunity at a time when I doubt that we could launch another operation like we did with the Falkland Islands, to defend it and win it back effectively, which is what we did. And that causes me some concern. And I would urge you, if you like what I'm saying here, go back and look at the last video I did, which is about defence and the need for us to accelerate defence infrastructure, and how we deliver it and how we might deliver it quicker. Because at the moment, it's becoming increasingly clear, and the events of this week, I think, have strengthened that mindset that we need to be delivering defence infrastructure and proper defence outcomes in terms of equipment and more troops much quicker than we're able to at the moment. So that sort of is where we are. But and one of the things I am going to try not to do today is let my views of Trump get in the way, because I don't have great views of Trump, and with Venezuela in particular, I have real concerns. So I'll give you an example. The Americans have just talked about today that Venezuela has agreed to just buy American goods. And if you're genuinely interested in the livelihoods and the better livelihoods for the residents of Venezuela, that's not the approach to take. You need to take a free market approach, so that as the Venezuelan economy starts to develop, if it does, and I have my doubts, if it does start to develop, they're able to import and bring in the cheapest goods from around the world, because that means internally goods will be cheaper, which will also mean better standards of living for the residents. So it's quite clear, or what I would say is not necessarily quite clear. It does suggest strongly that this is a move that is about the American economy and not about what's right or wrong for Venezuela. But I do think some of it, will do some long-term good. As an example, there's no way anybody could say that Maduro wasn't a horrific president, but it's also true that his regime is still in place. And one of the concerns I would have is that unless they have done some sort of deal with that regime, what we're basically doing is saying to a lot of generals who have got fingers in a lot of pies, including in the oil industry, that potentially, they are going to be written out of those deals, and they will no longer have a say in the oil industry, and no longer, I'm afraid, make money out of the oil industry. And if that's the case, and there isn't any consensus around that, we're basically inviting a terrorist situation. And the only way the Americans are going to be able to deal with a potential terrorist situation where, as an example, these generals create cabals that blow up oil refineries effectively, the only way the Americans are going to protect those oil refineries so that the oil companies can come in and start to refine oil and export it is with military boots on the ground. And I don't think the American people will like that. But I want to talk a little bit about domestic politics and how it applies, and how our politicians have, in my view, are getting it wrong. And I'm going to focus a bit with this on Kemi Badenoch, and I make no apologies for that. I have said previously, I think Kemi Badenoch has really, really upped the game. And I think that's true, and I think consensus is that that's the case. And you're starting to see the Conservatives do a little bit better in the polls at the moment, and that's probably as a result of that. But I think she's got quite a bit wrong in her approach and her attitude to Keir Starmer on this. That said, I think Keir Starmer may be able to do things a little bit better. I'm going to do the two bits of analysis I want to do. I'm going to do basically in order, really. So I'm going to start with her immediate response to the situation in Venezuela, which and a briefing which she gave to Sky News, which I'm afraid I think she got factually wrong. Actually, we'll talk about that afterwards. But here's the quote that she gave to Sky News. We're living in an increasingly dangerous world, and the NATO alliance is looking fragile. We want to make sure that we keep NATO together. That's why the Prime Minister should be doing everything he can to ensure that President Trump stays at the table. I don't have any problem with any of that. The next bit, though, however, I'm concerned about. What worries me is after the events in Venezuela, Keir Starmer hasn't even had a phone call with President Trump. That's shocking. When the US invaded Grenada 40 years ago, they told the UK first, and President Reagan was on the phone to Margaret Thatcher right after. Now, there's two issues with that towards the end. But the major issue to me, well, the first one is the comparison that she effectively does between Donald Trump's America and Ronald Reagan's America. First of all, we were talking about an America that was in the Cold War, completely different time and space. But also the comparison effectively between Trump and Reagan, which is something that Trump could exploit and use, whether you accept there's a comparison there or not, is difficult because Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan. And the relationship between Trump and the UK is never, ever going to be the same as the relationship between Reagan and the UK. Just isn't. And, that's a straight fact because Trump is a completely different person. So I think that was a mistake for a start. But then there's the comparison with Grenada and the situation in Grenada, where, quite frankly, Kemi Badenoch has misled people. And technically, she's probably right in that Ronald Reagan gave us, I think it was 11 hours notice, or gave Margaret Thatcher 11 hours notice of the invasion of Grenada. But the situation in Grenada, the lack of notice and what Margaret Thatcher felt was a lack of notice caused huge tension between in relationships between the UK and America, because Margaret Thatcher felt like she should have been given more notice and she was really angry about it because she would have wanted to influence Ronald Reagan and get him thinking twice about what he does and about the invasion. And if you don't believe me, go out and sort of check the articles, because all this came out when I think it's the 30-year rule where these things tend to be released, and has been widely commentated on in the media. And so to suggest that the situation at that point was perfect and to put it across as something that was an ideal is actually misleading. That's the reality. And when we're talking about really serious international issues like this, Kemi Badenoch needs to be better than that. But she also needs to think twice about finding reasons to oppose in the way that she did, and bringing up something like that as a way to oppose when actually it's factually incorrect. One thing that's interesting is if you look at similar videos that she did with other outlets, they don't mention Grenada, and I hope that Sky was the first one she did. She said what she said, and somebody said to her, "You can't be saying that. That's not correct." I hope that's what happened, but certainly she needs to be better than that. The second is her approach to Prime Minister's questions, and I thought she had her worst Prime Minister's questions for a long time on Wednesday. And part of that, there were all sorts of issues where I thought Keir Starmer basically proved her wrong. But it was also the tone and style of questioning that I had a problem with as well. Here's a little clip that was the thing that first made me think, oh, I'm not sure about this.
Mr. Speaker, the US is Britain's closest military ally. However, we are clear that the sovereignty of Greenland is sacrosanct. So can the Prime Minister tell us what influence is he bringing to bear with the US administration to ensure that is respected?
So I want to just repeat that quote there. The US is Britain's closest military ally. Is that correct? Do you think it is? Think about the situation with Ukraine at the moment. How have we dealt with Ukraine? Well, increasingly, Donald Trump has gone to Russia and listened to Putin, come up with a peace plan that isn't feasible, that is an absolute disaster for Europe. And then the Europeans have worked together to challenge Trump and to deal with and to sort Trump out, basically, and to get him to think twice. And that's been consistently where we are. It's the coalition of the willing, which is the UK, our European partners, trying to influence Trump. So if Kemi Badenoch had said historically the US is Britain's closest military ally, I could have bit it. But I don't think the US is Britain's closest military ally. Now, you could also argue that the seizing of the tanker that happened in the north, in the sea between Scotland and Iceland, where Britain participated, suggests otherwise. I don't think it does. I think we would have done that if it had been one of our European allies as well. But I think she did that because it found her and gave her grounds to challenge Keir Starmer and try and oppose Keir Starmer. And this is where I have a problem. When we're dealing with these serious, and they are serious, international issues, I think that Kemi Badenoch needs to find where she can consensus. She needs to stop automatically finding grounds to oppose and start, yes, ask questions, but to do so in a less confrontational way. Now, there are some that would argue that that's not Kemi Badenoch's style, and to a certain extent they're probably right. There is this argument that's been made before that Kemi Badenoch could start a fight in an empty room, and I think she's been a lot better than that more recently. But British politics does not deserve confrontation at all costs. It just doesn't, and the British people don't deserve it. With important issues, our political system needs to be able to build consensus. And that's part of the reason why I support a move towards proportional representation, because I think PR and governments, coalition governments, will force and create a different sort of politics where, when it's needed, politicians can work together. I would also say Keir Starmer could probably help this. I think Keir Starmer needs to have an active dialogue with both Kemi Badenoch and with Ed Davey on these issues, so that they can create, that dialogue and a supportive environment where it's possible. Because I think Ed Davey's been similar. Ed Davey's calling on the government to condemn and to condemn Trump over Venezuela. And there's a reality, which is that when it comes to it, Keir Starmer as Prime Minister has to act with a bit of diplomacy when it comes to dealing with Trump. I think the time is going to come further down the line where we go beyond that, and Keir Starmer has to tell Trump what it is. Things are as they are. And I think he's tried that, along with our European allies again, over Trump's approach to Greenland. And I think with Greenland, Trump has shot himself in the foot, to be honest. Whether he annexes Greenland or not, I'm not sure. Nigel Farage, who seems to know Trump, thinks that he won't. Here's the issue. If Trump had done what he should have done, which is had a serious conversation with Denmark and Greenland over building more military facilities in Greenland so that his military had better access and better control over the Arctic, which I accept the Americans and NATO genuinely need, I think he probably would have got his way. But he's now made the threat to annex Greenland. So say he follows on with that threat, with a conversation with Denmark, as I've just suggested, where he says, look, I want to build a new naval yard. I want to build a new airfield on Greenland so that I can take control and have more of a presence in the Arctic. As a resident of Greenland, wouldn't you think that more military facilities might be a precursor to annexation? Wouldn't that make you want to resist those plans? If I was a resident, I think it would me. And so that's why I think Trump has got it wrong. And I think that the language we're using with Trump to say this isn't an option is absolutely correct. I think it's wrong to say that it's not wrong to say it would be the end of NATO. I think it absolutely would. But I don't think Trump cares particularly. I don't think Trump is interested in NATO. I think Trump is interested in the defense of America. And I would say this about Russia and Ukraine. If Putin is seen to gain ground in Ukraine, let's say the next step beyond that is for him to make a minor incursion into a NATO territory. Let's say one of the Eastern European states that's a member of NATO. Let's say he did that and went in 10 miles or so, took a few towns over and stuff like that. Technically, that triggers Article 5 and would mean that NATO was involved in a war with Russia. And quite rightly so, because if Putin does that, actually it shows that he's got ambitions wider than just Ukraine, which I think his essays in the past have shown that he does. Do you think that America would be willing to get involved in that? I think America under Trump wouldn't. And I think, from that perspective, I think NATO under Trump has a serious problem. And I think we need to think about it. We also need to think about the fact that Trump technically is only president for 4 years, and therefore there will be life after Trump of some sort. And we would hope that includes the renewal of NATO as an organization. Now, I have to say the one thing Trump got right was challenging other NATO countries to contribute more towards defence, and so that we are more resilient on our own. And that's something that we need to seriously think about. The area where I also think we can work better with America is over the UN, because the Greenland, the Venezuela situation is one where I think the UN might have made a difference if it was an organization with teeth. And at the moment, the UN is utterly failing the world in its role as the world's policeman. I think it fails in other areas as well. But in this in particular, I think there's a real issue. And I think the West, including Trump, need to start saying, if you want us to not take unilateral action in the way that he has with Venezuela, then we need to enable the UN to be better so that it can deal with those despots when they're having a massive influence on the rest of the world. And shipping oil to Russia from Venezuela is having a massive impact on the rest of the world. So the area where I think we need to have a bit of focus, and I'd love to hear Keir Starmer talk more about, is about revisiting the UN charters so that we can make the UN an organization with some teeth again, so that we can create some stability in the world. A lot of work to be done there, because a lot of people won't want it, and including those in the UN. But I think we should. So I hope that has given you some food for thought. You might not agree with everything that I've said, but please think about, please think about liking and subscribing to what I do. I do think that, what I say, has meaning. And I do think this issue about the need for political change in the UK, and huge political change, is significant. And I hope next time there's less serious international issues happening, so I can talk about some domestic politics and some domestic issues that matter to me. But once again, thanks very much for listening. Please feel free to comment any way you want. And it's been an absolute pleasure again.